What if I told you that something quietly happening behind the scenes right now could change how people look at XRP moving forward? Not because of hype, not because of rumors, but because of how major financial institutions think about risk, infrastructure, and the future of digital payments. Before you scroll away, before you jump to conclusions, stay with me for a moment because this conversation is not about price predictions or overnight riches. It's about understanding signals, context, and why certain names entering the conversation make people stop and pay attention. If you're someone who watches the crypto space closely, you already know that most headlines are designed to trigger emotion. Fear sells, excitement sells, certainty sells, but real developments? Those usually arrive quietly, wrapped in cautious language, buried in reports, interviews, and institutional discussions that most people never read. And that's exactly why moments like this matter. Before we go any further, take a second to like this video if you appreciate calm, clear breakdowns instead of hype. And if you want to stay ahead of narratives without being dragged into panic or false promises, subscribe to the channel. It helps support this kind of content and keeps these conversations going. Now let's talk about what's actually catching people's attention when a major financial institution like Bank of America becomes part of the broader discussion around digital assets. People notice. Not because it means instant adoption, not because it guarantees anything, but because institutions of that size don't speak casually. They don't throw names around for entertainment. Every word is filtered through compliance, legal review, and long-term strategy. It's important to be very clear here. This is not about an official endorsement, and it's not about telling anyone to buy or sell anything. This is about understanding why XRP continues to appear in institutional conversations, while thousands of other digital assets never make it past speculation forums. Bank of America represents traditional finance at scale. Their focus has always been infrastructure, efficiency, risk management, and global payment systems. They don't chase trends the way retail markets do. They observe, test, analyze, and wait. When they discuss blockchain technology or digital assets, it's always through the lens of function, not excitement. And that's where XRP becomes relevant again. XRP was designed from the beginning with cross-border payments in mind. Speed, low cost, and scalability were not afterthoughts. They were the foundation. While many projects focused on decentralization narratives or experimental features, XRP focused on a very specific problem that still exists today: moving value across borders quickly and efficiently. That problem hasn't gone away. In fact, as the global economy becomes more connected, it's becoming more visible. Traditional cross-border payments can be slow, expensive, and opaque. Settlement can take days. Fees can stack up. Intermediaries add friction. Financial institutions know this better than anyone because they deal with it every single day. So when institutions talk about blockchain solutions, they're not asking, is this exciting? They're asking, does this work at scale, within regulation, and without breaking existing systems? That's the lens through which XRP has always been evaluated. Now here's where things get interesting. Most retail investors assume that institutional interest shows up as loud announcements or dramatic moves. In reality, it shows up as research papers, pilot programs, patents, and cautious language that avoids commitment while exploring possibilities. When people hear phrases like bullish in institutional contexts, it doesn't mean price optimism. It usually means technological relevance, structural potential, or efficiency improvement. That distinction matters a lot. Institutions don't speculate the way individuals do. They assess whether something fits into a system that already moves trillions of dollars. That process takes time, and it happens mostly out of sight. XRP's long history of regulatory scrutiny has ironically placed it in a position where institutions understand it better than many newer assets. Legal clarity, even when difficult, forces transparency, and transparency is something institutions value deeply. This is why XRP's story is so different from short-lived hype cycles. It has survived periods of intense doubt, negative sentiment, and uncertainty, while continuing to be discussed in serious financial contexts. That doesn't mean outcomes are guaranteed. Nothing in markets is, but survival under pressure is a signal in itself. Another reason this conversation matters is timing. Markets don't move in isolation. They move alongside macroeconomic conditions, regulatory shifts, and technological adoption curves. Sometimes multiple forces align at once, creating moments where attention suddenly spikes. That doesn't mean something magical happens overnight. It means people start asking questions again, and questions are powerful. Questions lead to research. Research leads to positioning. Positioning leads to movement, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. differently. A lot of people misunderstand how long-term narratives are built. They assume one announcement changes everything. In reality, narratives change through repetition, consistency, and validation from credible sources. When established financial institutions continue to reference similar technologies over time, even cautiously, it reinforces the idea that those technologies haven't been dismissed. That's important, because in a space crowded with thousands of projects, most are ignored by traditional finance entirely. Silence is often more telling than criticism. XRP has never been silent in these conversations. At the same time, it's crucial to remain grounded. No institution controls the market, no single comment defines the future, and no one should interpret discussion as instruction. This video is not financial advice. It's an attempt to understand context, not create expectation. If you've been in this space long enough, you've seen what happens when expectations get ahead of reality. People rush in emotionally only to be shaken out by volatility they didn't prepare for. That's why understanding structure matters more than chasing headlines. Markets are designed to test patience. They move in ways that frustrate certainty. They reward preparation more often than prediction. And that's why conversations like this should be approached with curiosity, not urgency. Now think about this from an American financial perspective. The US financial system values compliance, scalability, and risk management. Any technology that hopes to integrate at that level must meet standards far beyond what most retail projects consider. That's not a criticism of innovation, it's a reality of scale. XRP's design philosophy aligns more closely with that reality than many people realize. Whether that alignment leads to broader adoption remains to be seen, but the alignment itself is why institutions keep paying attention. And that brings us back to why this moment feels different to some people. It's not about one announcement, it's about a pattern of continued relevance, continued discussion, and continued positioning within conversations that shape the future of payments. That doesn't mean the path forward is smooth. It doesn't mean challenges disappear. It means the conversation hasn't ended, and in markets, staying in the conversation is half the battle. If you're still watching at this point, you're already ahead of most people who only read headlines. Make sure you're subscribed, because in the next part, we're going to go deeper into how institutional thinking actually works, why price often lags reality, and how narratives quietly shift before most people notice. Because what happens next isn't about excitement, it's about understanding. And understanding is where real advantage begins. Understanding is where real advantage begins, because once you understand how institutions actually think, you stop reacting to every headline and start recognizing patterns. Institutions don't chase momentum the way retail markets do. They don't wake up excited because something is trending on social media. Their decision-making process is slower, more structured, and far less emotional. When a bank like Bank of America evaluates emerging technology, the first question is never about price. It's about function. Does this technology solve a real problem? Can it scale without breaking? Can it operate within existing legal frameworks? And most importantly, can it reduce friction without introducing new risks? That's why institutional interest often feels invisible to the average market participant. It doesn't show up as a press release saying we're all in. It shows up as internal research, sandbox testing, quiet partnerships, and long-term observation. Institutions are comfortable waiting years for clarity if it means avoiding unnecessary risk. This is one of the biggest disconnects between retail expectations and institutional reality. Retail markets crave confirmation. Institutions value optionality. They want the ability to move when conditions are right, not the pressure to act early. XRP fits into that mindset because it was never positioned as a replacement for the entire financial system. It was designed to work alongside it. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Financial institutions don't want disruption that breaks everything. They want efficiency that integrates smoothly. Another thing that often gets overlooked is how institutions think about reputation risk. A bank doesn't associate with a technology unless it believes that technology can withstand scrutiny. Legal, regulatory, and public perception risks are weighed heavily. This is where XRP's long and very public regulatory journey becomes relevant again. While that journey created uncertainty, it also forced transparency. Everything was examined, questioned, and debated. From an institutional perspective, that process reduces unknown. unknowns. And in finance, reducing unknowns is incredibly valuable. Now, this doesn't mean adoption happens automatically. It means the asset remains on the table. And staying on the table is critical in a space where most projects disappear quietly after losing relevance. Markets tend to underestimate how important not being dismissed really is. Many technologies don't fail loudly. They fade away. They stop being discussed in serious environments. XRP has not faded away. That's why people pay attention when large financial entities discuss blockchain infrastructure, and XRP appears in the same conversation, not because it guarantees a specific outcome, but because it confirms continued relevance. Another factor worth understanding is how narratives evolve over time. Early narratives are emotional and extreme. Everything is either revolutionary or worthless. As time passes, narratives become more nuanced. The excitement fades, and practicality takes its place. XRP is now in that practical phase of its narrative. It's no longer about big promises. It's about whether it works, whether it scales, and whether it fits into a system that already exists. This shift in narrative is subtle, but it's powerful. It changes the type of people paying attention. Less speculation-driven interests, more infrastructure-focused interest. And infrastructure doesn't move fast. Think about how long it took for digital payments to become normal. Credit cards existed for decades before they were widely accepted. Online banking faced skepticism before becoming standard. Change in finance happens gradually, then suddenly. That suddenly part is what catches most people off guard. By the time something feels obvious, positioning has often already occurred. That's why institutional positioning feels boring until it isn't. Another important point is liquidity. Institutions care deeply about liquidity because they operate at scale. XRP's liquidity profile is one of the reasons it continues to be discussed in serious contexts. Liquidity allows large transactions without extreme price impact, which is essential for real-world use. This is also why price volatility alone doesn't define usefulness. Volatility is a market behavior, not a functional one. A system can be volatile and still be operationally sound. Retail markets often confuse volatility with failure. Institutions see volatility as something to manage, not something to fear. This difference in perspective explains why retail sentiment and institutional interest often seem disconnected. They're responding to different signals. Retail participants react to price movement. Institutions react to structural viability. That doesn't mean institutions are always right. It means their incentives are different. Now let's talk about timing, because timing is where frustration usually peaks. People want validation quickly. They want confirmation that their understanding aligns with market behavior. But markets don't provide validation on demand. Timing is influenced by macroeconomic conditions, regulatory developments, technological readiness, and capital flows. Any one of those can delay visible outcomes. That's why moments of silence can feel uncomfortable. Nothing appears to be happening, so people assume nothing is happening. In reality, silence often means work is being done out of public view. This is especially true in regulated environments. Public statements are limited. Progress is measured carefully. Language is chosen cautiously. If you've ever wondered why institutional commentary sounds vague, it's because precision without commitment preserves flexibility. Flexibility is power in finance. Another thing to understand is that markets often move before narratives catch up. Sometimes price reacts to positioning long before the public understands why. Other times, narratives build long before price responds. There is no fixed order. That unpredictability is what makes markets challenging, but it's also what creates opportunity for those who understand structure instead of chasing certainty. Now, let's pause for a moment. If you're finding value in this deeper breakdown, and you want to keep following conversations that focus on understanding instead of hype, make sure you like this video and subscribe. It tells the platform that thoughtful content matters, and it helps this channel continue producing it. Coming back to XRP, one of the most misunderstood ideas is that institutional interest means immediate action. In reality, interest often means monitoring. Monitoring leads to preparation. Preparation leads to readiness. Readiness doesn't announce itself. By the time action becomes visible, the groundwork has usually been laid quietly over years. This is why experienced market observers pay attention to consistency more than excitement. Consistency of discussion, consistency of relevance, consistency of presence in serious conversations.